In his curation for the 2014 Venice Biennale of Architecture, titled Fundamentals, Rem Koolhaas entitled the architectural roof as one of the fundamental elements of architecture. The traditional Kerala architecture, in its essence, is about the morphology of the roof. The hot and extreme humid tropical conditions are addressed very appropriately by this rather graceful element. As Kerala's building culture gradually transitioned from a labor intensive, expensive, and crafted building to more accessible, affordable concrete homes made by cheap, unskilled labor, the roofscape of our cities and villages started to look something like this. A friend once asked us, is this blue and green metal roofs that dots all around your place a new cultural and architectural identity? As people's means of living, needs, and situations have changed, the sloped roof is now a retrofitted utilitarian add on to concrete roof slabs. It is a desperate attempt to prolong the longevity of concrete building, gain additional space for domestic activities, and provide some relief from the tropical climate. This observation circled back on us in 2018 in one of our first build commissions. The brief begged for an appropriate modification and correction course for an already half-built house by a local contractor in Chammanad, which at one time, of course, was dotted by traditional houses. At the very beginning, we connected the aforementioned two problems quite instinctively, for the concrete roof slab was inevitably adorned by the blue and green metallic roofs. We decided the design problem is all about addressing this fascinating element, the architectural roof. After preliminary formal and planning correction, we sorted the traditional way of conceiving the Kerala roof, which is to ascertain the outline on the ground plane. The roof inscribes the house into a geometric framework of a square that originates from the center of the existing built structure. This container framework forms a veranda surrounding the house, a circumambulatory space between the outside and the home within. The overhangs in the square accommodated useful semi-outdoor spaces while also emphasizing the firm's naive attractions towards primary shapes and forms. A pyramid was born. Interestingly, the pyramid is also the firm's political statement in using a 45-degree angled roof that was historically appropriate only for temples and palaces. Now, the 45-degree roof looms over the existing construction of an ordinary family in Kerala. The next logical step was a gesture to bring in light, as in traditional roofs with courtyards. The pyramid now got truncated. One of the most consistent practices in our firm is to ponder on the universality of a problem. The roof of the 2018 house is now a universal element which is unburdened from its place and existence. This brings in an additional complication of its adaptability and its ability to exist as an independent entity. Logically, this translated as 4 strategic structural elements in the corners. The corner pillars recall the spatial organizational logic of Louis Kahn's notion of served space and servant space, perhaps most simplistically demonstrated in the Trenton bathhouse. The hollow columns in Kahn's project separate the homogeneous space of the 9-grid plan into distinct units while accommodating utilities and services. Similarly, the corner pillars in 2018 house respond to the needs of the clients in varying forms and functions while adding visual appeal to the composition. They become a kolapura, garage storage, water filtration unit, and a toilet. The architectural roof starts to get supported and stands on itself by programmatic, structural, singular rooms on all the 4 corners. The articulation and specificity of the roof and its corner elements can go from the most basic to the most elaborated depending on the conditions and means of a given project. Similarly, the room in the sky is a multifunctional space that brings light into the interiors of the house and at varying times is used for yoga or intimate moments of stargazing under the night sky. The courtyard becomes a recurring element. The courtyard becomes a recurring element existing in projects past and present. The universality of the roof now accommodates any structure within its confines. So much so that one can read the project simply as a roof in the landscape. Accepting the fact that the built landscape of Kerala may not change abruptly anytime soon, our attempt is to use the fundamental element of the roof as a tool to negotiate the heterogeneous urban scape of our built environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Now let us move on to the question and answer session.
Thank you first of all for the presentation. I was fortunate to see this project. Thanks to you. You took time off to take us around, though it was towards the evening time. I'm a very critical person. I think that's my role, and I not only want to do justice to it, but I love to do that. I expected from the roof and the courtyard that you have on the first floor much more than it delivered. That's my observation. The effort that you have to do to go inside the courtyard is not celebrated. On one hand, you are celebrating, for example, the journey towards the water body, towards the lotus pond and the bathing area. That's nicely articulated. But when you go to this lifted courtyard, it's quite disappointing because it's very limited. I mean, stargazing, you don't do it really through a courtyard. You need to be more in an open area, larger open area if you put your telescope. So that space was not invited, and it was rather an abstract space. It didn't, see, on one hand, you are creating this beautiful roof which is trying to create or attaching itself to the legacy of roof in Kerala. But you are introducing also something very abstract like that stargazing courtyard on the first floor. So both in some way are opposites, in my opinion. And the third thing or the second thing that struck me was the steel construction, which you showed here right now, and that's a question. You showed a very elegant steel structure in your pictures, but what we experienced there, and it happened to me, and I can speak maybe on behalf of Palinda, who is absent, unfortunately, today, that there was so much of steel. It was just only steel. And it felt very unfriendly. Going this steel ladder, it was almost like a ladder, going up this kind of jungle of steel, and then entering this abstract roof. I mean, I can imagine this as a space for an exhibition or an installation, but certainly not a daily space that you enjoy. So the roof, as much as it created a new typology maybe, or responded to a situation with a new typology that you have almost reinvented, referring to Louis Kahn, doesn't serve much purpose, in my opinion, when it comes to living within that roof. And my question then would be, how do you want to take this further in the entire legacy of roof making in Kerala? These are my few very critical observations. I told you I don't like to be too soft. So there you are.
I think the entire presentation was only about how to see this as a performing idea. A roof, this, as you see, is in its very crude form, or let's say very basic form. And this also happens to be the first build project of the firm. So we were really pushing the client to make something that he really don't wanted. So because he might put up a metallic roof some years later when when the slab start to underperform. So it's a continuing evolution of this particular element inside our practice. If you could come and see our projects, which is similar to this and which is starting to shape now, I think I could answer all your questions. But this project is not a case for that. That is what I think. I think I think that is the closest answer that I could give you.
Yeah, if I can kind of relate to what was just stated, but it's a little displaced from. After the pandemic, there seems to be a kind of search. Now it could be intuitive, it could be accidental, it could be spontaneous, it could be conscious, it could be critical. But overall, there's this kind of search where elements are being juxtaposed in very peculiar or strange ways. One could, if one is saying that. But I think the pandemic was stranger than that. So, but as an architect, if we step back sometimes, because what happens is that these elements and I find it fascinating, what you've done is fascinating, as fragments, as reimagination of fragments of what a roof could do or how it sits or the column. But I also think having done that, stepping back and now allowing the artifact to begin a dialogue backwards to you, rather than an architect all the time imposing and saying, this is what I want to do, this is what my roof will do. We are kind of trained that way, but at times, step back and look at what the element, imagine that it was now something constructed somewhere, you didn't know who has constructed it, so disown it, and let's say go back and see. And if you're connecting it with Trenton and all those projects, and try to look at what was Trenton trying to do. Where does Trenton leave, which a narrative which is unopened or opened, which one can take through in some other way, Because what happens is there are certain possibilities of spatial reimagination. And many times as architects, if the spatial reimagination becomes very functional and literal, you have the space, but then it's been interpreted in a literal way. Like for instance, the four corners. The four corners that you created have enormous possibility, Yeah. Then to go and inhabit it with those functions, becomes something very practical. Nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
We have to be practical also. But I think there is a possibility of spatial reimagination. I mean, that kind of a roof, or if I was on the road, and I think I would never have known that there's this suspended courtyard there.
Inside.
So there is a certain element of anticipation, certain element of all those layers are there. Then it's an issue, how does an architect really flow with the possibilities of that creation, rather than just these elements that are created because otherwise the possibilities that have, I think you could have 15 other iterations now from a project of this kind.
It's an alphabet.
But with that kind of stepping back, not a kind of the architect having made it, you know. Like I remember Professor Varki used to say that if you want to do a good project, just bring in a Greek amphitheater. Yeah, I'm just closing because, yeah, so I think those are the issues that one can look at. Yeah, thank you. Sorry I took a little time. I can see the glare.
I think there's something to be said for ambition. And you made a valid point that this was at the initial stage of your practice. And once the ambition is set, you might be able to meet it to a certain distance. It's a valid point that at the beginning stages of your practice, you reached a certain point, and it's valuable that you're developing it further. Yeah. I think a lot of these awards and a lot of the architectural discourse becomes about the perfection of the outcome. But I really think there is something to be said for having an ambition and trying and maybe succeeding in some ways and failing in others. It's good that you're taking it forward. Yeah. I have roots in Mangalore, and I think the roof is a very important motif that we have lost. If you go to Bali, their bylaws recognize roof as a sort of cultural artifact, and you can see what it does to the environment, you know. It's of course a complicated dialogue between freedom of expression versus homogeneity, and I think it's a valid discourse for a practice to have. It's rooted. So I agree with what my colleagues have said, but I also want to end with that coda that I think it's a worthwhile exploration. And yeah, it's well said that like sometimes, and especially in the younger stages of the practice, the idea surmounts, or not just the idea, the form of the idea just becomes very static rather than the dialogue that you're having with the thing. And both the strengths and the weaknesses are evident in the project itself. But having said that, I think all of us are critiquing it because at first glance, one sees the potential of raising these questions. Yeah. So thank you. Yeah. I don't know, like this is a monologue. There's really no time for a discussion, but that's how it is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.